Welcome to Making Your Miles Count Production, an educational program to all Canadian lease owner-operators with your host, Robert Scheper.
Lies, lies, lies. There are an amazing amount of lies in our culture, in the industry of the trucking industry, and this is a huge topic. There's many different ways we could approach it. The biggest thing probably is I'm a big believer in getting the 50,000 foot view to start off with, and then getting into the weeds after we've got the 50,000 foot view on there. If you Google lies and you do a little bit of search, you get all sorts of different things. They give you lists of different types of lies. In preparation for this, I think it was talking with Allan a little bit, and I was saying, well, there's white lies, and then there's really bad lies and stuff like this. And you brought out, what was it, a just lie? Or a
noble lie.
A noble lie. That's right, because that's a movie, right?
I have no idea.
The one where Britain got a dead body of a pilot.
Oh, yeah, but that's not what the name of the movie is.
Oh.
Yeah, that movie.
I watched that movie.
Okay.
It was really good.
Yes.
But it was basically, the whole thing was about fabricating a lie to get the Nazis to go in a different direction so that they would be more successful on D-Day. And so there are noble lies or justifiable lies. If we look at World War II, there was people hiding Jews in their basement and all sorts of places and keeping people alive, and they were lying through that whole process. So there are some good lies. Being a saboteur, you're lying that you're doing something
for a good cause.
For a good cause. You're lying for a good cause. But then there's lies all the way on the other end of the spectrum, all the way to you're going to have a shower and go into this public shower, and then they throw gas and then they kill you. You know, that's what the Nazis did, you know. They strategically lied to kill somebody specifically, or a group in a mass group. So there is unbelievably dark lies, and then there are noble lies. And in business and in life, we may not be exposed to both extremes, but there are all sorts in the middle. And I just jotted down a few different examples where I sort of categorized them into a few different categories. Harmless lies that don't bring any harm. They're not noble, but they don't bring any harm. Like your wife comes in and says, "Does my hat look nice?" And you would say, or do these jeans make me look fat? Do you tell the truth and say, well, those bananas and pineapple on the hat make your eyes look really nice. I don't know. You can say all sorts of different things, and realistically, it's a lie.
But you got to think of the consequences.
Yeah,
of the truth
there are too. Yeah, there's all sorts of. So there are some, I guess you say, white lies that are harmless. At least for the most part, harmless. I believe there's consequences to all lies, but definitely there are some that are harmless. Then there are some that are on the borderline where it's harmful, but it's indeterminable as to how much harm that actually was. I was thinking about Lance Armstrong. Remember, the story of Lance Armstrong, where he, 8-time Tour de France winner. And they kept saying over and over, you're doping up, you're doping up. And he says, no. And finally, after how many, like a decade or so, finally he admits, yes, okay, I'm doping up. Now, in context, the top 10% of everybody in the industry is all doped up. And so you take the top 20 people who have finished the Tour de France, they're all doped up in some way or another. So is he lying? Yes, he's lying. Technically, he's lying. But who's the people who were hurt? Other people who were lying too. That's a unusual situation. Like he lost millions of dollars in ad or sponsorship revenue and stuff like this. But I mean, he still had all of the prior money and stuff like that. And technically, the industry, for the most part, is still doped up.
Not much has changed since then.
No.
They're still trying to catch them.
He lied. There are some consequences. Somebody else could have very well won the Tour de France in those 8 years. But realistically, it's almost harmless. But then there's other people, like I thought of Bernie Madoff, who had this $65 million Ponzi scheme, or $1 billion Ponzi scheme, and absolutely decimated people. And he knew it was a Ponzi scheme, and yet he still took money in, and people suffered in a massive way. That's an example of where a lie, strategically put, causes a victim and a perpetrator. That actually happens a lot more in business than we actually think it does.
Mm-hmm.
It can be very subtle, but it can be sometimes extremely blatant. You guys have any big stories in your lives where you got lied to in business or so, and you either had to recover, or how did you recover?
I was thinking about it last night already, and this morning again. I only have one that I can really think about digging back. When I sold one of my trucks, I was supposed to pay capital gains. And so I invested quite a bit of money, I thought, because this person said, if you will invest this money, you won't have to pay income tax. So I did. And 2 months later, I lost everything. Anyway.
In that investment?
In that investment. The whole investment was crooked, and it went under, and we lost.
The person who told you that
was the bank.
Was the bank?
Was my bank manager, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. And that, we tried for a while to work with that, but I don't think anybody got any money out of it.
Did the bank manager get a cut?
I don't know. It ended up costing me more money than if I would have paid taxes.
Sure, yeah.
But how do you know, right?
Yeah.
I trusted them, and now I question a lot more before I do something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I remember buying a house, and it was a house probably built in the 40s and so forth, and in the country. And the basement, it had a lower ceiling, like a lot of these old houses did, and it was freshly drywalled and painted. And shortly after possession, we had a rainfall, and there was water in the corner of this basement. And then took a careful look, and I noticed from the outside, around the stucco, there was where the basement window was, there was a little crack. And so I figured, you know what, I'm going to open up this from the inside, and I'm going to, there's materials that you can use to seal so that it wouldn't come in anymore. So I open up this drywall, and here's this crack, comes down like this, and then it goes horizontal. So I keep opening up and opening up and opening up. The whole wall was a horizontal crack in it, and the guy had tried to reinforce it with a railroad, and bolted it on, and then he had just framed on the inside of it and put new drywall in, and it looked all perfect, right? Well, I ended up having to lift the whole house because the foundation was shot, right?
Oh, my
Lift
goodness.
the whole house, move the house all off the foundation, dig out the whole foundation, put a new foundation in there, and then put the house back on because it wasn't salvageable. It was not, there was no way of keeping it. The guy got away with it.
Yeah, he got away with it.
But see, that's kind of what he was just sharing was with the story you were telling about that athlete. Yes, he lied about drugs, and yes, he lied about the house. It looked perfect.
I mean, he didn't lie verbally. He obviously had prettied this thing up just before he listed the house,
Yeah.
so that he didn't have to deal with it, and hopefully the person buying wouldn't catch him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a verbal lie. The lie was he didn't disclose.
But people
It was a
still get
lie.
hurt.
Yeah, people get hurt.
A lie of
because there's-
omission.
A lie of omission, yeah.
Yeah. Like you got hurt. Now you got to spend all this money that you didn't think you had because he deceived you.
Yeah.
And this is kind of the same thing. There's a following, and when you have a following, and they begin to mistrust you by things you do, or say, you're hurting a lot of people. I learned a lot about that this last summer with some of the things that we were involved in, which I have repented over 1,000 times. We thought we were told the truth, and so we carried the message.
Mm-hmm.
And the message was a blatant lie. And I had to backpedal and make things right with people.
Yeah.
I was misled, and now I misled others.
Yeah.
And I didn't do it on purpose. I honestly thought I was speaking the truth
Sure.
Yeah.
until we found out the truth.
Yeah. About 20 years ago now is the event that motivated me to write Make Your Miles Count. And that is when a trucking company blatantly lied to a combination of both myself as well as a couple of our clients. It was not a lie just to cover up foolishness or something like this. It was a very, very strategic lie that had another lie on top of it to get us positioned in such a way to become completely vulnerable to that company. And once we were there, we were just absolutely decimated. I guess I grew up a lot naive. I just never thought people lied to the extent that like that. You watch World War II and Nazis lied and killed people, but that's so distant in the past or whatever. It doesn't happen currently, but it was so blatant. I was stunned. Actually, I was in shock to some degree, I guess, for several years. I couldn't fathom people lying just so that they can, get an extra $8,000, $10,000, $12,000 out of somebody. It was shocking. Yes, I did take him to court, and I settled. I shouldn't have settled. Maybe I should have, but I settled, and I said, okay, I'm going to settle, but I want to do what I can to help operators not to be exposed to this. And that's what motivated me to say, okay, listen, let's take a look at carrier contracts so that you make good, solid, honorable decisions and choices. That was the motivating factor. Now, as I was doing my research and I was going through it all, there's a few things I realized. That one of the factors was that this carrier had a fairly decent looking contract. If I would have just looked from a financial perspective what was on a piece of paper, I would have been totally okay with recommending this carrier. The contract in and of itself was basically useless. It makes zero difference what's on a piece of paper. If the people behind it are unethical, if they're crooked, who cares? Because you are absolutely poached. That was a huge revelation for me. Actually, a lot of my research, with my master's thesis and everything, I got well over 10,000 hours researching on a lot of this stuff. And I realized that all of that research shouldn't say is meaningless, but it's not nearly as important as the ethical treatment that the carrier is providing the driver and the operator. In my research, you have really high-paying carriers and you really low-paying carriers. The really high-paying carrier, everybody says, well, I should work at that carrier or whatever, but they had over 80% turnover at that company. Whereas in the middle, you had one that's, 10, 12%. And so really, a contract does make a difference financially, but the biggest thing is the carrier ethical that you're dealing with, and is it not? How do you judge? You primarily have worked mostly at one carrier, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've worked probably
Probably at 3 or 4.
3 or 4?
Yeah.
And so you have very large carriers
Yeah.
and some very small carriers.
Yeah.
What do you prefer? When they're small, you get to know the president of the company, and you can say, and you can take a look at how he deals with himself and stuff like this. Yeah. When they're large, well, you'll never see the president. Right. You'll just see second or third down.
One thing I've learned over the years, though, even working with one company, and that I did before I signed on to this company that we're starting with tomorrow. We were invited to the Christmas banquet, And what I did is I went around to all the drivers individually, and I asked them questions. And if I hear 40% of the drivers or even 30% of the drivers complaining about the company, well, then I throw a red flag. Okay, why are you complaining? But I talked to at least 10 or 12 of the drivers that were there, and not one of them complained. They were very happy and very happy with what they were doing and the way they were treated from dispatch to all the way to the boss.
It makes a huge difference.
I think probably all of us have had situations where something product has failed, and whether it's a warranty situation or something like this. Now, I want to deal with somebody that actually and I think you touched on it a little bit, that their integrity is more important than the paper. So if there's a 20,000 mile warranty and now my engine blows at 20,010, I want coverage because I think it's right. Yeah. I don't want to. If it's 20,000.1, you're getting nothing. Yeah. Right. I want to deal with that person that thinks long term and says, you know what, I want you as a customer for the rest of your life. Right? Yeah. And you know that's more important to me than being the letter of the law. Right. Now it's not lies here. We're talking about actually being honest. These are both in this situation. There's no lie being taking place. No. But I want to deal with that person that cares about me even deeper than the dot on the contract. Yeah, right?
Exactly. In my second book, there's lots of illustrations of different carriers. And there are some illustrations where a carrier had the right to do something, but they didn't. And then there's bad situations where the carrier shouldn't have done something, but they did it. And it was interesting, and I don't think I actually wrote it in the book. The carrier that had 10 to 12%, that's where I got the majority of the really good ethical examples. And the top paying carrier was the one where I got all of the bad examples on there. So is it important to get the highest paid according to a written contract? It's not necessarily reflects exactly what's happening.
It's kind of like I've been involved in the building industry for most of my life, right? Do you take the lowest bid on a subcontract? Yeah. Sometimes you know that bid, he'll never do it for that. Yeah. He'll go bankrupt before he'll.
Or it'll force him to cut corners.
Right? Yeah. So in some cases, you get people that say, well, I'm going to use this guy and I'll make sure that he has a bond so that when he goes under, the bonding company will pay the difference. And actually, it's the way I'm going to win this, the general contract. Right? I'm talking about now commercial construction, like larger contracts. But then there's other guys that would look at it and say, you know what? They would go to and say, you missed something. Yeah. You need to redo your numbers because you're 25% cheaper than the next four bids, and the next four bids are all within a few, percentage points. You need to go back. Yeah. Because they care about that company, right? So
or they'll give you the quote that's lowest, but then they'll at the end say, well, we didn't foresee this, so we have to add all this on later. Yeah. That happens a lot now. A lot. Just so they get the
extras.
Job.
Yeah, the extras.
Yeah. That's, and for me, a lot of times, sometimes I've heard of stuff like that, and I'm wondering, okay, is that what you were saying, a lie of omission? This is what I can do it for, but I'm not telling you that there's this extra that's going to come, and this is not on my contract. And this, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So that's talking from the person bidding. Yes. Right. But what onus is it of the person receiving the bid? If I know that you can't do it for this, right? And am I obligated? Yeah. And I believe an ethical person is obligated. If I know that that what you've promised to do is going to cause you harm, that you cannot live up to this comment or this contract, this bid, then out of my concern for you. It's all based on concern. Do I really care about the person that I'm dealing with?
Yeah.
Do I really care? Because if I would care about the person then if the person that I bought that house from really cared about me,
Yeah.
he
They
would say, you know what,
disclosed it.
he would have disclosed it. I would just want you to know that this is the situation with this basement, right? And you've run that into the situation too. If you have a carrier, just to let you know,
Yeah.
you want to deal with somebody that actually cares about the individual more
Right.
than the money. Not that the money isn't important, absolutely, because you can't. We're all in business. Business has to make money.
Yes. Yeah.
It has to. Otherwise,
There's no point in it.
There's no point. You will only cause harm to many people if a business isn't intent on making money. A business has to make money, and there's nobody should apologize for making money.
No.
But it's how you go about making the money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Not off the backs of someone,
Somebody,
but with the backs.
With the
Like,
support.
yeah,
Working
they're,
together.
They're all
Yeah.
going into a contract saying, you know what, I know you're going to make money off of me. And that's good
okay.
because
That's good.
if you're not making money, I'm not making money.
Yeah.
You were talking about my driving history, and I've worked for about 4 or 5 companies. 3 of them were fairly large. I enjoyed them because they were large enough that everything was extremely routine. There wasn't any variations from anything. Like, this is the way it is, and you just roll, and that's how it goes. The smaller companies, I made more money, but there were also more liabilities that came up along the way that I had to
Navigate through.
Navigate through, yeah. And the companies, the smaller ones, you really have to have that personal communication with. The company I'm working for now, it's been a long time since I've been so happy with how they deal with me. I haul a flatbed and I run percentage, and there's a lot of flatbed companies out there, and the smaller ones, not the big huge, I call it big corporate, but the smaller ones, they will pay percentage, but they don't tell you that they have a primary load broker that gets the load, they take their cut off of it, send it to the company, and then you get a percentage of that, as opposed to, so they take an extra percentage of it before you even see the load. You know, is it right? Well, they can do what
it's
they
legal.
want. It's legal.
Yeah.
It's their business. They can do that. Are they being transparent and honest? No, they're finding a way to get a few extra percentage. They'll probably go through a few more drivers than typical. And usually you can't nail it down and say that's my money or this is what you're doing. It basically comes a point where you just have that feeling, and I'm just not happy here anymore. You're being
Trust
nickeled
is a huge factor.
Yeah, trust and just being nickel and dimed.
Yeah, we're both thinking the same. The
book
Speed of
called
Trust.
The Speed of Trust.
A classic book, The Speed of Trust. Trust, it speeds things up, it brings costs down, everything. It's just it's a great feature to have in any industry. I did a lot of research on a few companies' pay statements a number of years ago, because there was a lot of errors in pay statements. So you go through them all and you find errors, okay? There was one carrier that had errors, a lot of errors. 50% of every statement had an error in it. So that's a lot. You got a 50-50 shot that there's something wrong there. There wasn't a huge error generally, but it's a whole bunch of nickel and dime stuff. Now, it was a large carrier. Once the operator noticed the error, all he had to do was fill out a form, hand it in, and the next pay statement, they got paid on it. Okay? 100% of the time, if you asked for it, you got it. But you had to be on top of it all. You know, that was a huge factor. They're not really lying, and yet they are.
Were they just sloppy?
The way they would have explained it is, in order for you to get paid for this, you have to tick all of the boxes when you're handing in your paperwork. And there are truck drivers who don't tick all of the boxes. They just make it an assumption that this is, whatever. But you have to very specifically do certain things. Canada Revenue Agency is notorious for this. Yeah. They make a lot of money on people who just don't check the box, But this particular carrier, their entire system was designed for all of these little tick boxes. But if you asked for it, you always got it. They're not overtly crooked, but they are technically crooked. Then I looked at another carrier that fabricated stuff and took deductions off of the statements. That's total fraud. Okay? If you talked about it, asked for it, you never got it. That is flat out fraud. No matter how much they pay or whatever, that's fraud. And that does occur in the industry as well. And then there was another carrier that I did a whole bunch of audits on there. I found that there were errors, but 50% of the time it was against the driver, and 50% of the time it was against the carrier. So in other words, they overpaid or something like this. Just from a statistical perspective, that, look, they're an honest company, and their system may not be perfect, but that there's honesty behind it, and you can see that. And it's very expensive doing a full-blown audit because you can spend days and days and days poring over dozens and hundreds of pay statements in order to get a general sense as to how ethical the carrier is. I could never do that as an accounting firm and say, okay, this one is ethical and this one is not. I'd be sued from here to from here to Vancouver. It would be terrible. So I can't actually legally do something like that. And it is a little bit frustrating because I only give basically half the story. Now here's the contract. That's fully exposed. Like, people can read the contract and chart out different carriers and stuff like this. But what you can't really chart out, generally speaking, is ethical behavior. So I like the idea of interviewing as many truck drivers as possible, like you did, and you just find out good character. I was thinking about 150, 200 years ago in England when a gentleman introduced somebody to somebody else. The official introduction of one person or one gentleman to another had a thread of liability to it.
You were vouching for the person.
They were vouching for the person. And so if I would introduce Peter to you, and then you ended up getting into business with Peter, and Peter did something untoward, you would come back to me, and I would have to make it right.
Yes.
Because I introduced Peter to you. That was that permeated society, and which is phenomenal. I mean, and it's all done by honor, and which is great. Now, we no longer have honor. We have lawyers, which that's supposed to solve things.
It's a whole new ballgame.
We're
more
going
truth than lies.
So it's very, very different. But realistically, when it comes to choosing a carrier, choosing a business partner or something like that, you have to rely less and less on the written and more just straight on the character. There's an underlying current that some people don't like when they're against capitalism. There's this glass ceiling or this old boys club or something like this. It doesn't make a difference whether it's old boys club or old girls club or, whatever it is. It doesn't make any difference. Realistically, what that old boys club provides is a safe network where you can get things done, where you can trust one another right through the whole entire process. And you don't just let somebody into a group just because they want to be in that group. Because you could lose your shirt.
Yeah.
And you can't just leave everything up to the lawyers because
you still lose your shirt.
You still end up losing your shirt.
Just to somebody else.
Yeah, exactly. There's a story that I heard. There was an individual who was buying and selling equipment, and he went to his friend, a good acquaintance, and said, "This is $100,000 piece of equipment. I'll give it to you for $90,000." Oh, he looks at it. It looks pretty good. Let me think about it. And he hems and haws, and he hasn't heard, and he doesn't get back to him for a month or two or something like that. Meanwhile, he says, well, okay, the guy didn't want to buy it, and he finds another buyer for it who looks at it and he says, oh my goodness, these are pretty good. And he says, yeah, what do you want for it? And he said, well, I want $100,000 for it, 105, something like that. He said, okay, all right, well, let me think about it. So again, this guy didn't return the call or whatever. A little bit of time went by, and the original guy who was offered it for $90,000 meets the other buyer. And the other buyer says, look, I lost the guy's phone number. I know you know him. You're a friend of his. Because we want to buy this piece of equipment for $100,000. And the guy says, he says, I can get that piece of equipment for $100,000 for you. He says, oh, really? Yep, no problem. Then the original guy goes to his friend and he says, I'll buy it for $90,000. Okay. So they sell it for $90,000 and he flips it to this new guy for $100,000. Okay, so he makes $10,000. In the end, what happened, the guy who's selling the piece of equipment finds out what his friend did. Okay? And everything's legal. There's nothing illegal or anything like that. But this guy made $10,000 and he says, hey, we should go into partnership. We should, do a whole bunch of other ventures and stuff like this. The guy who sold the piece of equipment, I agree with him. He says, not interested. And he slowly backed away from the guy and never got interacting with any kind of equipment or anything like that on there. And the guy, 6 months or a year later, couldn't understand why he wasn't going to get any kind of business off of this guy. He's being, he's stonewalled or whatever they call it, But realistically, he wasn't fully disclosing. If you're going to get into partnership with somebody and that partnership doesn't fully disclose everything, because what the partnership was supposed to be later on was worth much more than just the $10,000 or whatever that they were working on. Realistically, you break faith with somebody. It's another example where everything was done legally,
but deceptive.
Yeah. And do you want to get involved in a relationship like that?
For me, the first thing that comes to my mind is ultimately he sold his reputation for $10,000.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like that's all he felt he was worth, or felt he knew he could get away with it, but ultimately that he sold himself short.
Your integrity is worth so much. Even
it is. Yeah.
Like I have often said, well, if the company doesn't care, then why should I? And immediately there's a check deep inside and says, hey, why do you want to stoop to their level?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Keep your integrity. And you know what? When you do that, you will go way farther than somebody that's going to try to cut corners or compromise.
Yeah.
Keep the integrity is very, very precious.
That feel driving down the road, that feeling. Well, there's a lot of crap happening, but I'm better than that. I'm not going there.
Yeah.
And I know that over my career, there's been a lot of places where I felt I've been dealt. It's all been legal, but just because the company says I'm liable, I realize I am not as liable as they think I am. I may have had a smaller part in the issue, and they're holding me to a higher a higher financial standard. I end up paying what they say, but I know that I've gone above and beyond. I know that they know. I'm guessing one or two of them thinking he's a sucker, or I can depend on this guy. It's not about this or that, or he'll be there. So when the next really good paying load comes along and there's a lot of liability and whatever, whose phone rings? I may have had to dish out $2,000, but if I get it in 3 trips from now, I double that. I'm not behind.
No.
And my integrity lasts.
It takes a lifetime to build it, and it takes a second to tear it down.
Warren Buffett said it takes 20 years to build a reputation, 5 minutes to destroy it.
Oh, you can do that a lot faster.
Lost faster than 5 minutes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It is so critical. Once a person has destroyed it, how can you actually rebuild it?
It's almost impossible.
Mm-hmm.
At least with that
Depends
person.
how old the person is.
Yeah.
If the person got away with $5,000 and he goes back and he says, okay, to compensate all this, here's $8,000 or $10,000.
Mm-hmm.
You know that you're dealing with somebody with integrity, but sometimes you can't pay. Sometimes you minimized your own losses rather than making money.
Right. Yeah.
People who think that business is without ethics, you have to, every morning you wake up and you have to live with stuff like that.
It's not just the money. It's a reputation that you build every day.
Yeah.
And people say everybody lies.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you don't have to. I mentioned this before, but there was many customers that called my company and said, hey, I want Peter and Kathy to come bring our stuff. And then I get home and he says, what are you doing to the customers up and down the road? Nothing. I'm just treating them the way they should be treated. That will always benefit you.
Yeah.
Always.
You have a lot of experience in large corporate world. People we know lie, but do corporations lie?
Of course. I mean, you look at Bernie Madoff. That was their example there.
But that's
much
Bernie
bigger.
Madoff, isn't it? It's not really the corporation.
Well, I think the whole corporation probably was. There was a lot of people that in the know. They might not even been charged, but they suspected something was going on, right? In that situation.
Wasn't a lot of that set up on his word?
He had his kids. He had his wife, who apparently didn't, claimed ignorance of it. But he had, his right-hand people that were his accountant.
Yeah.
His accountant, I think, he ended up being charged as well. But that's just one example. Do corporations lie?
Through policy.
Through policy. There are lots of corporations that, and whether we look at contracts where corporations, large corporations, but I'm trying to do this without naming any of them, that have been fined billions of dollars for being deceitful, right?
Yeah.
And whether that is in other countries where they felt that it was necessary to, if they were dealing in a country where that was the norm,
Yeah.
right? And so they lowered their standards to fit that country. There you might say, well, that was necessary in order to do business in that country because that's how the way that country operated. They had to pay bribes. They had to do these things, right, in order to, because that was the norm there.
Yeah.
But there's other situations where they provided false documentation, where they hired somebody. Look at the cigarette industry, in the 50s and so forth. And you had doctors, Marlboro, like they were all part of the thing that this was healthy, right? And this was, you need, for your health, you needed to smoke a cigarette, right? And they had the endorsements of all these doctors, right? So you can look back and you can see lots of large corps that, were later on found out to be, they paid people to provide the endorsement that they wanted. You can go through the corporate. There's lots of examples.
I was just
Unethical behavior.
last night. I was just flipping through something, and I seen a 15 or 20 second blurb from Joe Rogan. They were going through the food pyramid. They're coming out with a not new standard, but new way of saying what's a higher priority or what's better for you. And they have 100. 100 is the best food you can possibly get, and the lower the number, the more you should stay away from. And they were comparing some stuff, and it was what is that? Frosted Wheaties. Okay, Frosted Wheaties were like 72, 73 or something, right up there. Whereas ground beef was like 22, 23 or in the 20s or something like that. And Joe Rogan says, what in the world? How can you say this highly fructose corn syrup is better for you, triple, than ground beef? And then they went through some other stuff, There was one egg, just a hard-boiled egg was something like, 45, can't remember the numbers or whatever, but something like 20 points higher was manufactured egg.
Oh my goodness.
So if it's an egg substitute, it's of higher value than an actual egg. And he does a lot of swearing. I'm not a big fan of swearing, but I mean, it becomes clear that the people who put these standards on these I think it's just sold to the highest bidder.
Yeah, it becomes evident that there's an agenda.
There's a lobby group that says, okay, well, who wants if you want something in the 70s or 80s, this is how much. Well, I'm conjecturing on this or whatever, but it is so bizarre, and so this is a government agency telling us what's healthy and what's. Well, how are we supposed to trust what the government's going to say now? Well, there's no way in the world that I would trust anything. That whole department is gone.
And if you are not suicidal, if you show up dead tomorrow, you're not suicidal, right?
There's people have made those statements. Allan Musk made that statement, right?
It's just it's some of it is just insane. Like, we're supposed to trust these government agencies. Like, healthcare is a huge thing. Like, how am I supposed to trust healthcare when I'm young and when I was younger? Whatever, like our digestive system when we were in 20s, 30s, and 40s or whatever, we can eat anything and it doesn't really affect us. Now when we're 50s, 60s, you know, I can't eat what I had like I did when I was 20 years old. There's not a hope, you know, so I have to manage it. And stuff that affects me will probably not affect you, or at least not as much, and vice versa. So we have to really customize, and we have to create our own food table and what we can eat and what we can't eat and stuff like this. So to delegate that to a government agency is really ridiculous.
People in general, they trust. I think we're at a point in our world that if we don't do our homework, if we don't do some research on our own and decipher this stuff and run it through our own conscience, we will constantly be deceived.
Yeah.
But people that don't fall for everything, that actually do some homework. I mean, we look at it now, I don't want to mention the word, but throughout this last 3 years, you run into people and you talk to people, 5% of people that I've talked to that have actually done any research into any repercussions or is this good? Is this actually what they promised?
I came into, I guess you would call the pandemic, with a bias in my mind. And that bias came because I went to my MBA, and we went through different industries. And these industries had different factors. Like, for instance, we found out that the industry that spends the most on advertising is the automobile industry. Okay, they just, nothing comes close to the automobile industry when it comes to buying advertisement. And the thing that popped into my head, first of all, we were told and we researched that the biggest difficulty or the biggest industry for fraud was the pharmaceutical industry. That's what we were told. And this was back in the 1990s already. We went through case after case after case of how they were fraudulent all around the world. We're in Steinbach here, and we had BioVale. You know the story of BioVale. My wife actually worked at BioVale for a while. BioVale got into major fraud, because they were breaking every rule. I mean, everybody broke rules, but these guys were just ridiculous. Actually, Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger were interviewed about specifically BioVale. And they said, I think it was Charlie Munger, who's the funniest of them. He says, the balance sheet and income statement, he says, that is sewer. It's worse than working on a sewer. And he says, and my apologies to all of the sewer workers for putting BioVale in the same category as what you work on. So it was trash. And yes, they went bankrupt, and they changed to something else. Valiant. They went to change to Valiant, and they tried to recoup and stuff like. Or was it BioVale that went to Valiant, and then Valiant was what they were saying? But anyways, that whole aspect of it. Then suddenly it got into I guess the pandemic, and I said, I just want to. I'm going to watch a little bit first. Okay. And I didn't want to talk about it. Sorry.
No. And that's fine. It's a good point to bring up, though.
Yeah.
Because there's so many people that are so confused. We have never seen a deception more than we have in the last 3 years.
Yeah.
And it's everywhere.
Our whole entire culture, actually, we're in a culture war. I wrote an article in Over the Road magazine, I think it was a little over a couple of years ago already, where I just said, we're in a civil war. It's not fought with guns and bullets, but with words
Yep.
and technology and lies. The first casualty in any war is the truth. We're at the place back, I mean, if you'd have looked even, 2015 or so, there was the truth and there was a lie. We don't even have that anymore. Now we have a lie and counter lie. I mean, everybody's lying. And it's very, I shouldn't say discouraging, but it's overwhelming the amount of lies that are out there. And we just have to, first of all, we have to stop getting involved in every single controversy that's out there, because whether it's TikTok or whatever, it's very overwhelming. I'm of the opinion that lying, there's no such thing as a corporation lying. I believe people lie. Corporations are just reflective of who the manager or who the people are. There was a carrier in, we'll say the city. There was a carrier in city that unbelievable amount of lying that they participated in, very lower level. I don't think I have ever told somebody, leave that company and go to that company. I've never said that. If I've said anything, I've said, we've never had a successful operator at that carrier that lasted longer than 6 months. And if you want to move to another carrier, here's a list of 3 or 4 or 5 or something like this, depending on what you want to do, flat deck, reefer, or dry van, or whatever. And so that's the advice that I have, because realistically, you can't expose yourself to liability, which is what got me into trouble many years ago when my master's thesis was released, which is another story or whatever. But I had written a portion of my master's thesis. It was written for academia. It wasn't written for the public. I was convinced, somebody massaged my ego, should I say, and I was convinced to show them a copy of my master's thesis. And I just said, look, it's not written for public consumption. Please, just keep it private. Well, that was the last thing they did. They took a whole bunch of, I think there was 10 or 12 pages. They just faxed it out to a bunch of people. One of the participants was trying to do a class action against me. I phoned my professor at the time, and I asked, what do I do? I'm getting all sorts of flack. And he gave me some really great advice. He said, disappear for 6 months. It'll all go away in 6 months. And I thought, okay, I trusted him. So I actually jumped on the road, and sure enough, 6 months later, everything was gone or whatever. And then I got back and I continued on in life. But corporations can lie. When you have a corrupt, bad leadership in a carrier, sometimes a relatively good carrier can buy a relatively bad reputation client, reputation company. And that's what actually occurred in a situation a number of years ago. I'm not a big fan of good companies buying bad companies, because the cultures, they had to get rid of the vast majority of the management leadership in there, because they just wouldn't fit well in a solid quality culture. You can change it, but sometimes to change a bad reputation into a good reputation is extremely expensive. It's like they have to prove themselves over and over and over again. So it can happen that a carrier with a bad reputation can become better, but it has to do with who either the shareholders are or the president is. It's people related. And you got to find the person who's in charge, and are they instilling ethics in there. But when we're in a culture of, we're in I guess you call a civil war of cultures, and there's lying going everywhere, it's exhausting. We have to get into a group of individuals where we trust, and stay within that group until the civil war is over. We can't get involved in every single battle that's out there. I just flipped through some stuff on my phone just the other day, and I probably counted 6 or 7 major topics that I could intellectually get involved with and emotionally get involved with. And I don't think that helps. I think that just increases our stress. We don't focus ethically on our business and being able to be at our top A game because we're being consumed by everything else.
Lots of noise.
Yeah, lots of noise.
It seems most people can only do a certain amount of things very well, only a few things very well. Once you start bringing more things into it, it gets more extremely difficult to maintain quality. As an owner-operator, quality is, it's crucial.
Not just for the operation of your truck, but also, you know, for your own personal character development and everything.
Yeah.
Too many irons in the fire means nothing gets done right. I guess that's the same in the construction industry too, eh? Like, I mean, if people tries to be everything to everybody, you end up being nothing to nobody.
There are people that you want to surround yourself that if there's an area you don't understand or can't see yourself getting involved with, there is people that you have to associate with that you ultimately trust.
Yeah.
You know what?
You got to find a good mechanic.
I don't know how to rebuild a motor. I know this guy. And if I go there, I say, you know what? It's not running right. Can you fix it? Yes. I walk away. You've got the wrenches, you know, and when it comes back, you got to say, thank you. You've made my truck run again. That's what you do best. Here's what you deserve. And we're both happy. At that point, you can't be tight with your money either. Because if you get a mechanic that gets something running and they do a good job, he's helped you save money.
Yeah.
And you're rolling again. But you want him again, though. A one-time service doesn't help you. You'll never find another.
Yeah.
There's too many mechanics or whatever out there that are willing to take your money and only do half the job.
There was a situation I had with a client a number of years ago where he came into a shop, and it was a major shop in a major city, and started yelling and screaming. Not yelling and screaming, but he says, "I got to get out on the road now." And he talked to the service manager, or whatever, and I don't care what the cost, I got to get out of here. That's not how to develop a safe environment where you're going to be treated appropriately, because that guy's bill was obviously through the roof. But he created it himself by how he presented himself. And it's not necessarily that means that they lied to him. You have to have a certain amount of decorum. It's like a little bit like playing poker. You have to hold your cards, and you have to know what you're dealing with, and you have to play appropriately. Yeah.
Building relationships, so important. Like even with a mechanic, like the shop that I've been at the same shop for many, many, many years. And I have a very good reputation with the shop, and they with me. But it also gives you favor that when you call from on the road and say, "Hey, can you get my truck in tomorrow? I'll be home tonight. Can you get my truck in tomorrow? Just need this and this done." You know what? They will shuffle it around and push the other guys to the back and bring you in, because you have developed a relationship with them, and a good relationship. You come in there and you're a professional. You don't come in there kicking and screaming and demanding stuff. And but relationships, it is so key everywhere you go, is build properly relationships. I have a good reputation with bad people, and I have good reputation with good people. Like I go from anywhere from the street person to the multimillionaires. We have friends in all the way through. That doesn't come overnight. You have to build that. And it is so important. And people think, especially today, you can be as rude as you want to be, and it's okay. No, it's not okay. It's not okay.
Exactly.
It just isn't. And you know what? Don't be afraid to apologize. If you made a mistake, apologize. I always say my middle name is Sorry. I don't find it hard, because I am not a person that likes conflict. And it doesn't matter with who it is. It can be with DOT, it can be custom, whatever. I don't like conflict. And I won't compromise my values for that.
That's it.
But I will keep a good reputation. Like I have a good reputation with customs, U.S. and Canada. man, when we roll up there, they know us, and they don't forget when you're kind and friendly.
Yeah.
They don't forget that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It goes so far with the company, with everything.
Yeah.
The entire industry is like, even I've been talking to some trucking company presidents, and there is working a relationship with a lot of different carriers. Like one carrier ABC will haul for 1, 2, 3, and vice versa. Wherever there's excess trailers or more power or whatever, and they work back and forth, and they work together. Everybody understands that there is a strong level of honor and commitment and loyalty and trustworthiness in any industry, whether it's construction, trucking, whatever it is. The narrative by media and Hollywood or whatever that the free market system or capitalism or whatever you want to call it is all just a bunch of crooks. If you're a crook, you're not going to survive long term. I remember when I was wrestling with all this Make Your Miles Count and the crooked company that motivated me to write the book. I talked to a president of a trucking company, and he said, there are crooked companies out there, but 2 to 7 years and they're gone, and which is absolutely true. Well, he said 3 to 7, and I thought, what would I create, or what would I define as success if I could bring that 3 to 7 year down to 1 to 4 years? So they're out of the industry in 1 to 4 years. That would be successful, because if everybody looks for integrity, and that's what they're judging on, that increases the turnover of those crooked companies much faster. That really is what I'd like to see in the industry, where people develop a sense of, that person I don't want to work for because that person doesn't represent my values. If I could contribute to bringing those numbers down, I would feel very successful in the industry. And that's really dealing with lies. You have to take that into consideration. Develop that radar where you say, wait a minute, skepticism, I'm going to hold off on something until I get a little bit more information, that kind of thing. Lies is a huge topic. We could go on. We could go on forever. Well, thank you guys so much for coming out today and discussing. Hopefully we've helped some people and been able to give them a little bit more of a snapshot in how to develop their long-term business and create value for them.
Thanks for stopping by Making Your Miles Count. For further Making Your Miles Count productions, call us at 877-987-9787 or download us at makingyourmilescount.com.